The autumn of 1903 brought an unusual chill to the fertile valleys of central Oregon. But it was not the changing weather that troubled rancher Cal Brennan, as he made his morning rounds at the Cascade View Ranch. Was the increasingly erratic behavior of his horses that had begun 3 weeks earlier and was growing more pronounced each day, threatening not only the animal's health but also the reputation he had spent 12 years building as one of the territory's most reliable suppliers of working horses to logging camps and mining operations throughout the Pacific Northwest. Cal operated the Cascade View Ranch on 6,000 acres of rich pasture land along the Mackenzie River, about 40 miles east of Eugene, where he specialized in breeding and training draft horses that combined the strength needed for heavy logging work with the intelligence and temperament that made them safe and reliable partners for the dangerous work of moving massive timber through challenging mountain terrain. His operation employed 15 full-time ranch hands and maintained herds of Clydesdales Percherons and Belgian draft horses that were sought after by logging companies from Northern California to the Canadian border. At 34, Cal had established himself as one of Oregon's most knowledgeable horsemen, with expertise in both breeding programs and training methods that produced animals capable of the precise teamwork required for logging operations, where a single mistake could result in injuries or deaths for both horses and human workers. His horses were known throughout the region for their exceptional intelligence, steady temperaments, and ability to work effectively in the dangerous conditions that characterized the Pacific Northwest timber industry. The strange behavior that Cal had first noticed in his prize Clydesdale stallion, Thunder Mountain, had initially seemed like simple restlessness or seasonal adjustments to changing weather patterns. But as the symptoms spread to other horses in his herd, it became more severe. Cal began to suspect that something was seriously wrong with his animal's health or environment that threatened the foundation of everything he had built over more than a decade of careful work. Thunder Mountain, normally a calm and reliable horse, whose steady temperament had made him the foundation of Cal's breeding program, had begun displaying signs of agitation and confusion that were completely contrary to his established personality. The massive stallion would pace restlessly in his stall, respond unpredictably to familiar commands, and show signs of disorientation that suggested neurological problems affecting his ability to recognize familiar people and environments. "Easy, boy," Cal said as he approached Thunder Mountain's stall, speaking in the calm, reassuring tone that had always been effective in managing even the most difficult horses. "What's got you so worked up? You're acting like you've never seen me before." But Thunder Mountain's reaction to Cal's approach was alarming instead of the friendly recognition that had characterized their relationship for 5 years. The stallion showed signs of fear and confusion, backing away from his owner as if he were a stranger who posed a threat. The horse's eyes showed an unfocused quality that suggested vision problems, while his movements were unsteady and uncertain in ways that indicated serious coordination difficulties. The examination that Cal conducted revealed that Thunder Mountain was suffering from symptoms that went beyond simple behavioral changes to include physical manifestations that suggested serious health problems affecting multiple body systems. The horse's eyes showed signs of inflammation and discharge. His coordination seemed impaired when navigating familiar spaces, and his responses to stimuli were delayed and inappropriate for an animal of his training and experience. Most concerning was the fact that similar symptoms were beginning to appear in other horses throughout the ranch, suggesting that whatever was affecting Thunder Mountain was spreading through the herd in a pattern that indicated either contagious disease or environmental contamination affecting animals regardless of their age, breeding, or previous health status. "Tom," Cal said to his ranch foreman, Tom Mackenzie, who had worked at the Cascade View Ranch for 8 years and knew the horses as well as anyone, "I've never seen anything like this before. These animals are acting like they're sick, but I can't figure out what's wrong with them or why it's affecting so many different horses at the same time." Tom's observations confirmed Cal's assessment, while also providing additional details about the progression and distribution of the mysterious symptoms affecting the horses that made the situation even more puzzling and concerning. "Boss," Tom replied, his voice reflecting the worry that had been building among all the ranch hands as they watched previously reliable animals become unpredictable and potentially dangerous. "It started with Thunder Mountain about 3 weeks ago, but now I'm seeing similar problems in about half the horses in the main herd. They're all showing signs of confusion, unsteadiness, and what looks like vision problems that make them dangerous to work around." The veterinary consultation that Cal arranged with Dr. Henry Morrison, the most experienced horse doctor in the region, who had been treating animals throughout Central Oregon for more than 20 years, provided professional confirmation that the symptoms were serious and potentially life-threatening, while also ruling out most of the common diseases and conditions that could cause such widespread problems in a horse herd. Mr. Brennan, Dr. Morrison said, after examining several of the affected horses and conducting preliminary tests for the most common equine diseases, these animals are showing signs of neurological damage that suggests poisoning rather than infectious disease. Something they've been exposed to is affecting their nervous systems and causing the behavioral and physical symptoms you've observed. The possibility that his horses were being poisoned filled Cal with both anger and concern. As it suggested, either deliberate sabotage by someone who wanted to damage his operation or accidental contamination that could affect not only his animals, but also other livestock and potentially even human health in the surrounding area. The financial implications were staggering, as Cal had invested more than $50,000 in developing his breeding program and establishing his reputation as a reliable supplier of high-quality working horses. But Dr. Morrison's investigation of potential sources of poisoning focused attention on the most basic and overlooked aspect of horse care: the hay and feed that provided the foundation of the animal's nutrition, and which could easily become contaminated without obvious signs that would alert caretakers to the danger lurking within seemingly normal agricultural products. Mr. Brennan, Dr. Morrison continued, his expression becoming more serious as he considered the implications of what he was observing. I want you to show me exactly what you've been feeding these horses, and where you've been getting your hay and grain supplies. Poisoning cases like this are usually caused by contaminated feed, rather than deliberate sabotage. But the effects can be just as devastating, regardless of whether the contamination was intentional or accidental. The contaminated supply. The systematic investigation of the feed and hay supplies at the Cascade View Ranch that Dr. Morrison conducted with Cal's assistance revealed evidence of contamination that went far beyond simple spoilage or poor storage practices, indicating deliberate adulteration of agricultural products with substances that had no legitimate purpose in animal feed and which posed serious threats to both animal and human health. Throughout the Pacific Northwest region, the hay that Cal had been feeding to his horses appeared normal in color, texture, and odor, showing none of the obvious signs of mold, rot, or contamination that experienced ranchers were trained to recognize and avoid when selecting feed for valuable animals. The bales had been properly stored in dry conditions with adequate ventilation, and Cal had followed all the standard procedures for maintaining feed quality that he had learned during his years of experience in horse management. But Dr. More detailed examination revealed the presence of foreign substances that had been deliberately mixed into the hay during processing or storage, creating contamination that was virtually undetectable without sophisticated testing equipment and chemical analysis techniques that were not available to most ranchers and farmers. Mr. Brennan, Dr. Morrison said, as he examined samples of the contaminated hay under magnification and conducted preliminary chemical tests, I'm finding evidence of industrial chemicals and metallic substances that have no business being anywhere near animal feed. Someone has deliberately contaminated this hay with materials that are toxic to horses and could cause exactly the kind of symptoms you've been observing. The discovery that the hay contamination was deliberate rather than accidental transformed Cal's understanding of the problem from a simple agricultural mishap into evidence of criminal activity that threatened not only his own operation, but potentially every ranch and farm that had purchased feed from the same suppliers throughout Oregon, Washington, and Northern California. The chemical analysis that Dr. Morrison arranged through contacts at the Territorial Agricultural College confirmed the presence of lead compounds, arsenic derivatives, and industrial byproducts that could cause exactly the kind of neurological damage and behavioral changes that Cal's horses were experiencing, while also revealing contamination levels that indicated systematic and prolonged adulteration of the feed supply. Dr. Morrison, Cal said, as they reviewed the laboratory results that confirmed their worst fears about the extent and nature of the contamination. Who would do something like this? And why would they want to poison livestock throughout the region? What possible benefit could anyone gain from destroying horses and damaging agricultural operations? The investigation that followed revealed a complex conspiracy involving corrupt feed suppliers, industrial waste disposal companies, and the deliberate contamination of agricultural products as a method of reducing the costs of proper waste management, while generating additional profits from the sale of adulterated feed at normal market prices to unsuspecting customers throughout the agricultural community. the feed supplier that Cal had been purchasing from, Pacific Northwest Agricultural Supply, had been accepting payments from mining companies and chemical manufacturers to dispose of industrial waste by mixing it into hay and grain products that were then sold to unsuspecting ranchers and farmers throughout the region, creating a criminal enterprise that generated profits from both waste disposal fees and fraudulent feed sales. Mr. Brennan, said territorial investigator James Patterson, who had been assigned to examine the contamination case after reports of similar problems began emerging from other agricultural operations throughout the Pacific Northwest. What we're finding suggests that this isn't an isolated incident affecting only your ranch. The company that supplied your hay has been systematically contaminating agricultural products for at least 2 years, affecting dozens of operations throughout the region and causing damages that could reach into the millions of dollars. The scope of the contamination conspiracy was far larger than Cal had initially imagined, involving not only the feed supplier, but also transportation companies, storage facilities, and even some government inspectors who had been paid to ignore evidence of contamination in exchange for regular bribes from the criminal organization that had been operating throughout the agricultural supply chain. The financial impact of the contamination extended far beyond the immediate costs of treating affected animals to include lost productivity, destroyed breeding programs, cancelled contracts with logging companies, who could no longer rely on Cal's horses for their operations, and the long-term health consequences for horses that had survived the poisoning but suffered permanent neurological damage that would affect their usefulness for the remainder of their lives. Thunder Mountain's condition had stabilized with proper medical treatment and careful nursing. But Dr. Morrison warned that the stallion might never fully recover the coordination and reliability that had made him valuable for both breeding and work purposes, effectively ending his career as the foundation of Cal's breeding program in eliminating years of careful genetic selection and training. Cal, Dr. Morrison said during one of his follow-up examinations of the affected horses, Thunder Mountain is lucky to be alive, but the neurological damage he suffered is likely permanent. He'll need ongoing care and probably won't be suitable for the kind of work you've been training your horses to perform. The same is true for most of the other horses that were affected by the contamination. The treatment program that Dr. Morrison designed for the affected horses required specialized medications and care techniques that were expensive and time-constrained, creating additional financial burdens for Cal, while also requiring him to develop expertise in managing animals with permanent disabilities that would need ongoing support for the remainder of their lives. But perhaps more challenging than the immediate medical and financial problems was the damage to Cal's reputation and business relationships that resulted from the widespread knowledge that his horses had been poisoned, even though he had been a victim rather than the cause of the contamination that had affected his animals. Cal said logging camp supervisor Bill Henderson during a conversation about future horse purchases that had been planned for the spring logging season. "I know this wasn't your fault, but we can't risk using horses that might have health problems or unpredictable behavior. We'll have to find other suppliers until we're sure your animals are completely recovered and reliable for the dangerous work we do in the timber operations." The loss of business relationships that Cal had spent years developing threatened the economic viability of his ranch operation, while also creating uncertainty about whether he would be able to continue operating as a commercial horse breeder and trainer in the competitive Pacific Northwest market, where reputation and reliability were essential for success. Justice and recovery. Legal action that Cal pursued against Pacific Northwest Agricultural Supply and the other companies involved in the contamination conspiracy required him to work with attorneys who specialized in agricultural law and criminal prosecution, creating additional expenses while offering uncertain prospects for financial recovery from defendants who had been systematically stealing from their customers while poisoning their livestock. Mr. Brennan, said attorney Margaret Sullivan during their initial consultation about the prospects for legal action against the companies responsible for the contamination. Proving criminal liability in cases like this is often difficult because the companies involved typically have resources to hire experienced legal representation and to challenge every aspect of the evidence against them. However, the documentation that Dr. Morrison has gathered appears to be quite strong. But the investigation that territorial and federal authorities conducted revealed evidence of the contamination conspiracy that was so extensive and well documented that prosecution became inevitable, while also providing opportunities for affected ranchers to recover damages through both criminal restitution and civil litigation that could compensate them for their losses. The criminal trial that resulted from the investigation of the feed contamination conspiracy became one of the most significant agricultural crime prosecutions in the history of Oregon Territory, attracting attention from government officials, agricultural organizations, and legal experts throughout the Pacific Northwest who recognized the case as a test of whether existing laws provided adequate protection for farmers and ranchers against deliberate contamination of their supplies. The evidence that prosecutors presented during the trial revealed that the contamination conspiracy had been operating for over 3 years, affecting more than 200 agricultural operations and causing millions of dollars in damages to livestock, crops, and farm operations throughout Oregon, Washington, and Northern California, making it one of the largest agricultural crime cases in American history. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," said lead prosecutor David Harrison during his opening statement, "the defendants in this case deliberately poisoned the food supply for thousands of animals throughout the Pacific Northwest, motivated solely by greed and complete disregard for the consequences of their criminal actions on the farmers, ranchers, and communities that depended on healthy livestock for their economic survival." The testimony that Cal provided about the impact of the contamination on his horses and his ranch operation was both technically detailed and emotionally compelling, demonstrating the devastating effects of the poisoning, while also illustrating the broader implications for agricultural operations throughout the region and the trust that farmers and ranchers placed in their suppliers. "Mr. Brennan," Prosecutor Harrison asked during Cal's examination, "can you describe for the jury what you observed when your horses began showing symptoms of poisoning?" Thunder Mountain went from being one of the most reliable and intelligent horses I'd ever worked with, to an animal that couldn't recognize me and couldn't perform even simple tasks, Cal replied, his voice reflecting the pain of watching animals he cared about suffer from deliberate cruelty. Watching him suffer and knowing that someone had deliberately caused his condition was one of the most heartbreaking experiences of my life. The conviction of 12 defendants on charges ranging from criminal conspiracy to agricultural terrorism resulted in prison sentences and financial penalties that reflected both the severity of their crimes and the need to deter similar attacks on the agricultural sector that could undermine food security and economic stability throughout the region. The restitution that the court ordered provided financial compensation for affected ranchers and farmers, while also funding programs to improve the inspection and regulation of agricultural supplies to prevent similar contamination incidents in the future, creating safeguards that would protect livestock operations throughout the Pacific Northwest. But for Cal, the most important outcome of the legal proceedings was the validation that his horses had been victims of criminal activity rather than his own negligence or poor management, restoring his reputation within the agricultural community, while also providing resources for continuing their medical treatment and rehabilitation. The recovery program that Cal developed for his affected horses became a model for treating animals that had survived poisoning incidents, combining traditional veterinary care with innovative rehabilitation techniques that helped horses regain as much functionality as possible, despite permanent neurological damage that would affect them for the remainder of their lives. Thunder Mountain's gradual improvement demonstrated both the resilience of horses that received proper care and the possibility of adaptation to disabilities when animals were provided with patient, consistent support from knowledgeable caretakers who understood their limitations and worked within them. Dr. Morrison, Cal said as they observed Thunder Mountain working with a specially designed training program that accommodated his neurological limitations. "He may never be the same horse he was before the poisoning, but he's learning to work within his limitations, and he's still got the heart and intelligence that made him special." The partnership that developed between Cal and Dr. Morrison during the treatment and rehabilitation of the poisoned horses grew into a collaboration that advanced veterinary understanding of toxicology and neurological rehabilitation, while also creating new approaches to caring for disabled animals that could be applied to horses suffering from various forms of injury and illness. Their research and clinical work attracted attention from veterinary colleges throughout the country, leading to the establishment of a specialized treatment center at the Cascade View Ranch that provided care for animals suffering from various forms of poisoning and neurological damage, while also training veterinarians in advanced treatment techniques. Legacy of vigilance. The transformation of the Cascade View Ranch from a traditional horse breeding operation into a center for veterinary research and agricultural safety education reflected the lasting impact of the feed contamination crisis on both Cal Brennan and the broader agricultural community of the Pacific Northwest, creating innovations and safeguards that would protect livestock operations throughout the region for generations to come. The agricultural safety programs that Cal and Dr. Morrison established at the ranch provided training for farmers and ranchers in recognizing and preventing contamination of feed supplies, creating expertise that helped other agricultural operations avoid the kind of devastating losses that Cal had experienced, while also establishing protocols for early detection of contamination before it could cause widespread damage. What we learned from the poisoning of our horses, Dr. Morrison explained to visiting agricultural extension agents who came to study their safety protocols, is that even experienced ranchers can be victimized by contamination that's designed to be undetectable using traditional methods. The key to prevention is understanding the supply chain and implementing testing procedures that can identify problems before they affect animal health. The veterinary treatment center that grew from their initial work with poisoned horses became one of the most advanced animal rehabilitation facilities in the western United States, attracting cases from throughout the region and developing techniques that advance the field of veterinary toxicology and neurological rehabilitation, while also training the next generation of veterinarians in specialized care techniques. Thunder Mountain, despite his permanent disabilities, became a symbol of resilience and recovery that inspired both veterinary professionals and animal owners who faced similar challenges with horses that had suffered neurological damage from various causes, demonstrating that animals could maintain quality of life even when their capabilities were permanently altered. He may not be able to work the way he used to, Cal would tell visitors who came to see Thunder Mountain and learn about rehabilitation techniques. But he's still teaching us about the importance of patience, adaptation, and the kind of care that helps animals maintain their dignity even when they face permanent limitations. The regulatory reforms that resulted from the contamination conspiracy included stronger oversight of feed suppliers, mandatory testing procedures for agricultural products, and criminal penalties for deliberate contamination that made such crimes far more risky for potential perpetrators, while also providing resources for enforcement and prosecution. The Federal Agricultural Safety Act, that was influenced by evidence from the Oregon contamination case, established national standards for feed safety while also providing resources for enforcement and prosecution of agricultural crimes that threatened both animal and human health throughout the country, creating protections that extended far beyond the Pacific Northwest. Senator Dr. Morrison testified during congressional hearings on the proposed legislation. The contamination conspiracy that affected our ranch and hundreds of others throughout the Pacific Northwest demonstrates that existing regulations are inadequate to protect farmers and ranchers from deliberate attacks on their operations by criminals who see agricultural products as convenient disposal methods for industrial waste. The educational impact of the case extended throughout agricultural colleges and veterinary schools, where the contamination incident became a standard case study for teaching students about the importance of feed safety, supply chain security, and the recognition and treatment of poisoning in livestock, ensuring that future agricultural professionals would be better prepared to prevent and respond to similar incidents. The marriage between Cal and Dr. Morrison's daughter, veterinarian Dr. Emily Morrison, created a partnership that combined Cal's practical ranching expertise with Emily's advanced veterinary training, enhancing both the ranch operation and the treatment center that had grown from their response to the poisoning crisis, while also establishing a family legacy dedicated to animal welfare and agricultural safety. Emily, Cal said during their wedding ceremony at the ranch, working together to help Thunder Mountain and the other horses recover, taught me that the best partnerships are built on shared commitment to healing and helping others, whether they're animals or people who depend on them. The children that Cal and Emily raised at the ranch grew up understanding both the vulnerabilities of agricultural operations to deliberate contamination and the importance of vigilance and testing in maintaining the safety of food and feed supplies. That formed the foundation of agricultural success throughout the region. Their son Michael became a veterinary toxicologist who developed new methods for detecting contamination in agricultural products, while their daughter Sarah became an agricultural safety inspector who worked to prevent similar contamination incidents throughout the western United States, carrying forward their parents' commitment to protecting animals and agricultural communities. Papa and Mama taught us, Michael said during a presentation at a veterinary conference, that protecting animals and the agricultural sector requires constant attention to potential threats and the development of systems that can detect and prevent contamination before it causes harm to animals or the people who depend on them. The 20th anniversary commemoration of the contamination crisis brought together hundreds of people whose lives and careers had been influenced by the work that had grown from Cal's determination to understand and treat the mysterious illness that had affected his horses, creating a legacy that extended far beyond the original crisis. The agricultural safety protocols and veterinary treatment techniques that had been developed at the Cascade View Ranch had become standard practices throughout the region, protecting countless animals from similar contamination, while also advancing the broader understanding of toxicology and rehabilitation that benefited animals suffering from various forms of injury and illness. 20 years ago, Cal said during his speech at the anniversary celebration, "I thought I was dealing with a simple case of sick horses. What I discovered was evidence of criminal activity that threatened the entire agricultural sector and required us to develop new approaches to protecting both animals and the people who depend on them for their livelihoods." Emily added her reflection on the transformation that had resulted from their work. "The contamination of our horses was a tragedy that could have destroyed our ranch and our lives. Instead, it became the foundation for research and education, programs that have protected thousands of animals and agricultural operations throughout the Pacific Northwest and beyond." Thunder Mountain lived to the remarkable age of 28, spending his final years as a gentle teacher for students and visitors, who learned about veterinary rehabilitation, while also experiencing the profound bond that could develop between humans and animals who had survived trauma together and found new purposes despite their limitations. The story of the Cascade View Ranch contamination case became part of the agricultural history of Oregon, taught in farming and veterinary programs throughout the state as an example of how individual vigilance and professional dedication could expose criminal activity while also advancing scientific knowledge that protected both animals and agricultural communities throughout the region and beyond. If this incredible story about uncovering criminal contamination and turning tragedy into progress moved your heart, smash that like button and subscribe for more amazing true stories about people who refused to accept that animal suffering was inevitable. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that individual vigilance and determination can expose criminal activity while protecting entire communities. Comment below and tell us about a time when you noticed something wasn't right and investigated further. Ring that notification bell so you never miss our latest inspiring stories. Remember, protecting those who depend on us requires constant attention to potential threats and the courage to investigate when something seems wrong.